The rain poured heavily that evening, creating a curtain of water that blurred the streetlights and cast shimmering reflections on the asphalt. A haunting scream pierced through the storm, freezing every passerby in their tracks. A heavily pregnant woman, cradling her swollen belly, stumbled backward, her face contorted in pain and terror. Behind her, a towering police officer loomed, his expression cold and unyielding. "Get down now!" the officer barked, his hand hovering menacingly over his holstered weapon. The woman, Olivia Carter, gasped for air, clutching her stomach as she tried to reason with him. "Please. I'm pregnant. I can't get down like that. I'm just waiting for my husband. He's inside. Did I ask for your life story?" The officer's voice was a harsh growl. His steel-toed boot shot forward, striking Olivia in the abdomen. She collapsed to the ground with a guttural cry of pain, clutching her belly as her screams blended with the rolling thunder above. The world seemed to slow as onlookers gasped in disbelief, phones trembling in their hands as they recorded the scene. Some yelled for the officer to stop, others were too paralyzed with shock to intervene. But the damage had been done. Olivia's sobs of agony and fear echoed in the air. Suddenly, the door of a nearby restaurant burst open. A man sprinted out, his eyes wild with rage. Marcus Carter, Olivia's husband, had seen everything through the window. His heart pounded as he took in the sight of his wife lying on the ground, rain mixing with her tears. "What the hell did you just do?" Marcus bellowed, charging toward the officer. The cop spun around, his hand instinctively dropping to his gun. "Stay back. Don't make me use this." But Marcus didn't stop. "You put your hands on my wife." His voice boomed like the thunder, louder than the cries of bystanders, louder than the storm. He dropped to his knees beside Olivia, his trembling hands trying to assess her condition. She winced and clung to his arm, her lips barely able to form the words, "Our baby." Marcus's vision blurred with red-hot fury. He rose slowly, towering over the officer now, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. The officer took a step back, his facade of authority faltering under Marcus's unwavering glare. "You're gonna regret this," Marcus whispered, his voice low and venomous. And just like that, the screen fades to black. What happens next will leave you speechless. How far will Marcus go to protect his wife and unborn child? Stay with us to uncover the shocking twists and turns of this unforgettable story. From the chaos of that moment, we rewind to the calm before the storm, a time when life for the Carters was filled with hope and anticipation. Marcus and Olivia had been planning their future with excitement, preparing for the arrival of their first child. But what led to that devastating confrontation? And what revenge would Marcus take against the man who had shattered his world? 2 months earlier, the Carter household was a bubble of excitement. Olivia, 7 months pregnant at the time, was radiant as she stood in their small but cozy kitchen, humming softly while arranging baby clothes into neat piles. Marcus entered, balancing a box of diapers in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other. "Diapers and daisies," Marcus said with a grin, setting them down. "Because nothing says romance like being prepared for midnight diaper duty." Olivia laughed, her hand resting on her belly. "You're ridiculous, but I love you for it." Their life wasn't extravagant. Marcus worked as a warehouse supervisor, often pulling long hours, while Olivia had recently left her job as a teacher to focus on the pregnancy. But despite their modest means, their home was filled with love and anticipation for the baby they had long dreamed of. "I was thinking we could take a walk later," Olivia said, folding a tiny onesie. "Get some fresh air before dinner." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You mean walk to the ice cream shop?" "Maybe," Olivia teased, her grin giving her away. Life felt perfect. But perfection has a way of attracting shadows. A week later, Marcus was on his way home from work when his phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced at the headline, "Rising tensions between local communities and police spark protests." Sighing, he turned off the screen. The growing stories of police misconduct and racial profiling had become too frequent, too close to home. Marcus hated to admit it, but he'd started to grow paranoid. Olivia had noticed it too, his growing unease whenever they were out in public, his insistence on keeping receipts for every purchase, his sharp eyes watching the rearview mirror whenever a patrol car followed too closely. That night, after Olivia went to bed, Marcus sat in the living room with the TV on low. He flipped through channels, but his mind wasn't on the screen. He couldn't shake the sense that something was looming, something that would test him in ways he wasn't prepared for. 2 weeks later, the storm arrived. It started like any other Friday. Marcus and Olivia decided to grab a bite at their favorite family-owned diner. Olivia wore her comfiest maternity dress, and Marcus made jokes about her obsession with blueberry pancakes. "I'm telling you," he said as they slid into a booth, "this kid is going to come out craving syrup." "Blame your DNA," Olivia shot back with a playful smirk. As they ate, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was his coworker, texting about a work-related issue. "I'll be back in a sec," Marcus said, excusing himself to make the call. Olivia stayed in the booth, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. The din of the restaurant faded into the background until a shadow fell across her. She looked up to see a police officer standing by the table. His nameplate read Officer Jabe Daniels. "Ma'am, I need to see some ID," he said curtly. "Excuse me?" Olivia asked, her brows knitting together in confusion. "We've had reports of a suspect matching your description in the area," he said, his hand resting on his belt. "Dark hair, blue dress." Olivia blinked. "A suspect? I'm just here having dinner with my husband." Daniels leaned in closer. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. ID now." Her heart pounded. Something about his tone sent a chill down her spine. She carefully reached for her purse, trying to stay calm. "I don't understand. What's this about?" "Keep your hands where I can see them." Daniels barked suddenly, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of other diners. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. I'm just getting my ID." "You're being uncooperative," he said coldly, gripping his baton. "Step outside." The tension in the room was palpable. Onlookers whispered, their gazes bouncing between Olivia and the officer. Olivia hesitated. "I can't step outside. I'm pregnant." Danielle's jaw tightened. "I'm not gonna say it again." In the restroom, Marcus's phone call was interrupted by the muffled sound of commotion outside. He opened the door to see people standing, their eyes fixed on the front of the diner. A sinking feeling gripped him as he heard Olivia's voice. He ran toward the booth just in time to see Officer Daniels gripping Olivia's arm, pulling her toward the door. "Let her go," Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Daniels turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Stay out of this. She's interfering with an investigation." Marcus stepped between them, towering over the officer. "She's pregnant. What the hell is wrong with you?" "She refused to comply," Daniels snapped, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Step back, or you'll both regret it." The restaurant was dead silent, the air thick with tension. Olivia clutched her belly, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, please, don't." But Marcus didn't step back. His fists clenched, his chest heaving with barely controlled rage. "If you touch her again, I swear." Danielle's radio crackled. "Suspect apprehended." "False alarm." The officer hesitated, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he released Olivia and stormed out of the diner, leaving behind a sea of stunned faces. Marcus dropped to his knees beside Olivia, his hands trembling as he held her close. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Olivia sobbed into his chest, unable to answer. Marcus's jaw tightened, his mind racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Little did they know, the confrontation at the diner was only the beginning. The events that would follow would push Marcus and Olivia to their breaking point, forcing them to face a system that seemed designed to crush them. And Marcus, he would stop at nothing to protect his family. The next morning, the Carter household was eerily quiet. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she held a steaming cup of tea. Marcus paced the floor, his fists clenching and unclenching as he replayed the events of the previous night in his mind. "I should have done something more," he muttered, his voice low and filled with frustration. Olivia glanced up, her eyes swollen from a night of crying. "Marcus, don't. You were there for me. You stopped him. But for how long?" Marcus snapped, slamming his hand on the counter. "What if he comes back? What if next time He stopped himself, swallowing the bile rising in his throat. Olivia stood and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We can't live in fear." But we also can't stay silent. We need to report him. Marcus stared at her, his jaw tightening. Report him? To who? The same system that protects guys like Daniels. He shook his head. They won't listen, Liv. They never do. Later that day, Marcus sat in their small living room, scrolling through his phone. Video clips from the diner confrontation had already started circulating online. Some showed the officer gripping Olivia's arm. Others captured Marcus's heated confrontation. The captions were inflammatory. Pregnant woman harassed by officer, and another example of police overreach. The comment section was a war zone. Some expressed outrage on their behalf. This is sickening. That officer needs to be fired immediately. Others, however, were less sympathetic. We don't know the full story. What if she really was a suspect? Marcus's blood boiled as he read the dismissive comments. The internet wasn't enough. People needed to understand the depth of the injustice they'd faced. I'm going down to the station, he said abruptly, grabbing his jacket. Olivia, sitting nearby, looked up in alarm. What? Why? I need to file a formal complaint, Marcus said firmly. If they think they can just brush this under the rug, they've got another thing coming. Olivia hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing her face. Be careful, Marcus. Don't let your anger get the better of you. Marcus kissed her forehead. I'll be fine. I promise. The police station was a sterile, intimidating building. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he stepped inside, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the rows of desks and stern-faced officers. Approaching the front desk, he cleared his throat. I'm here to file a complaint against Officer Jabe Daniels. The desk sergeant raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. And what's the nature of your complaint? He used excessive force against my pregnant wife last night, Marcus said, his voice steady but laced with anger. The sergeant typed something into his computer, barely glancing at Marcus. Do you have any evidence to back up your claim? Marcus pulled out his phone, opening one of the videos from the diner. I've got plenty of evidence. The sergeant watched the video with a stony expression, then handed the phone back. All right. Fill out this form, and we'll look into it. Marcus gritted his teeth. That's it? You'll look into it? This man assaulted my wife. Sir, the sergeant said, his tone clipped, I understand you're upset, but yelling won't help your case. Fill out the form, and we'll handle it. Marcus snatched the clipboard and sat down in the waiting area, his pen pressing so hard against the paper it nearly tore. He felt the eyes of the officers around him, their stares heavy with judgment. As he handed back the form, the sergeant gave a non-committal nod. We'll be in touch. But as Marcus walked out of the station, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. He didn't trust their promises. Over the next few days, Marcus kept a close eye on Olivia, his protective instincts in overdrive. But Olivia's condition began to deteriorate. She complained of persistent pain in her abdomen, and Marcus's concern grew with each passing hour. You're going to the hospital, he insisted one morning, helping her into the car despite her protests. At the hospital, doctors ran tests and performed an ultrasound. When the results came back, Marcus's worst fears were confirmed. She's experiencing complications likely brought on by stress and physical trauma, the doctor explained. We're going to do everything we can, but she'll need to stay here for monitoring. Marcus's chest tightened as he looked at Olivia lying pale and exhausted on the hospital bed. Will the baby be okay? The doctor hesitated. It's too soon to say for certain, but we'll do our best. The sight of Olivia hooked up to machines, her hand resting protectively over her belly, lit a fire in Marcus's heart. Daniels hadn't just hurt his wife, he'd put their child's life at risk. Marcus left the hospital that evening, his jaw set and his mind racing. Filing a complaint wasn't enough. He needed to make Daniels, and the entire department, pay for what they had done. As he walked to his car, he noticed a patrol vehicle parked nearby. His fists clenched at the sight of the emblem, a bitter reminder of the man who had upended their lives. A thought crept into his mind, dark and unrelenting. What if justice won't come unless I deliver it myself? He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. But deep down, he knew he was reaching a breaking point. That night, Marcus sat in his car outside the diner where it had all started. The memories of that evening played on a loop in his mind. He stared at his phone, scrolling through the comments on the video again, looking for support, for validation. But one comment stood out, chilling him to the core. That cop's been accused before. Nothing ever happens. They always cover for their own. Marcus's grip tightened on his phone. If the system wouldn't hold Daniels accountable, then he'd have to take matters into his own hands. What would you do if someone put your family in danger and got away with it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Marcus spent the next few days consumed by his thoughts. Olivia was still in the hospital, her condition stable but fragile. The house felt suffocating without her laughter, without the sound of her humming as she moved through their small space. Marcus sat alone on the living room couch, staring blankly at the videos that had now gained significant traction online. News outlets picked up the story, turning it into a local headline: "Pregnant woman harassed by officer sparks outrage." The media attention offered a small sense of justice, but not enough. Marcus knew better than to trust public outrage to bring meaningful change. People would move on, they always did. The anger burning inside him wasn't going anywhere. The turning point came when Marcus received a call from an anonymous number. He hesitated but answered. "Marcus Carter," a deep voice on the other end asked. "Who's asking?" Marcus replied, suspicion thick in his tone. Let's just say I'm someone who knows what you're going through. I saw the video, and I've got information you might find useful." "What kind of information?" Marcus asked, sitting up straighter. "About Daniels. He's dirty, Marcus. You're not the first family he's hurt, and you won't be the last. He's been protected by his department for years, but I've got files, proof of everything. If you want to take him down, meet me tonight." Marcus's heart pounded. Was this real? Or a trap? "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Because people like Daniels don't deserve a badge. Are you in or not?" After a long pause, Marcus muttered, "Send me the details." That evening, Marcus drove to a dimly lit parking garage on the edge of town. He parked his car and stepped out, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the empty space. A figure emerged from the shadows, wearing a hoodie pulled low over their face. "Marcus," the man asked. "Yeah." "You got something for me?" The man handed Marcus a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Internal complaints, witness statements, even body cam footage they tried to bury. Daniels has a pattern: excessive force, racial profiling, abuse of power. He's untouchable because the department always covers for him." Marcus's hands tightened around the flash drive. "And you're just giving me this?" "Why?" "I've seen what happens when people like him go unchecked," the man said. "I've lost too much already. If you're willing to fight, this is your ammunition." Marcus didn't sleep that night. He plugged the flash drive into his laptop and spent hours combing through the files. Each document, each video, was worse than the last. Daniels's history was a chilling catalog of abuse, and yet he'd faced no real consequences. Complaints were dismissed, investigations were closed, and victims were silenced. One video stood out: body cam footage from a traffic stop that turned violent. Daniels could be heard taunting a young black man before slamming him against the hood of his car. The man's cries of pain echoed in Marcus's ears, a grim reminder of what Daniels had done to Olivia. The system had failed. Marcus couldn't. The next morning, Marcus visited Olivia at the hospital. She looked pale but managed a small smile when he walked in. "Hey you," she said softly. "Hey," Marcus replied, sitting beside her bed. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "The baby's hanging in there." Marcus swallowed hard, his chest tightening at the thought of how close they'd come to losing everything. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'm going to make this right, Liv. I promise." With the flash drive as his weapon, Marcus began his mission. He contacted local activists, journalists, and lawyers, sharing the damning evidence against Daniels. The story gained traction, and soon, the media frenzy around Daniels reached a fever pitch. Protesters gathered outside the police station, demanding justice. Signs bearing messages like "Accountability now" and "Justice for Olivia" filled the streets. But Daniels wasn't going down without a fight. One night, as Marcus returned home from a meeting with a civil rights attorney, he noticed a black SUV idling near his house. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He parked his car and approached cautiously, his phone ready to record. The SUV peeled away before he could get close, but the message was clear: someone was watching him. The intimidation tactics only fueled Marcus's resolve. He wasn't afraid, not anymore. The department announced an internal investigation into Daniels, but Marcus didn't trust them to deliver real accountability. He knew how these investigations ended, quietly, without consequence. So, he took matters further. With the help of the activists and lawyers, he organized a town hall meeting where victims of Daniels' abuse could share their stories. The turnout was overwhelming. Person after person stepped up to the microphone, recounting their encounters with Daniels. Tears flowed, voices cracked, and the room buzzed with anger and determination. The event was streamed live, drawing thousands of viewers. Marcus stood at the back of the room, his heart heavy but hopeful. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt the tide starting to turn. But just as things seemed to be moving forward, a shocking twist shook Marcus to his core. Late one night, he received an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of Olivia in her hospital bed, asleep. Scrawled across the bottom were the words, "Back off." Marcus's blood ran cold. His hands trembled as he stared at the photo. Daniels, or someone working with him, had crossed a line. They were threatening his family again, and this time, they were playing for keeps. Marcus sat in the dim light of his living room, the photograph of Olivia in his trembling hands. His mind raced, torn between fury and fear. He had known Daniels and his enablers wouldn't go down without a fight, but this? This was a level of malice that chilled him to the bone. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. The call connected after a few rings. "Marcus, what's going on?" It was Terrence, a civil rights attorney who had been helping Marcus navigate the legal fight against Daniels. "They're threatening my family," Marcus said, his voice low but sharp. "I found a photo of Olivia slipped under my door. Someone was in her hospital room." There was a pause on the other end. "That's serious. Have you reported it to the police?" Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "The police? You mean the same people protecting Daniels?" "No. I can't trust them." Terrence sighed. "I understand, but we need a paper trail. At the very least, it'll strengthen your case. I'll come by tomorrow and help you file a report." Marcus agreed reluctantly. He didn't believe for a second that filing a report would change anything, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He stayed by the window, watching the street outside for any signs of movement. The memory of the black SUV lingered in his mind, and every shadow seemed like a threat. By morning, he was exhausted but resolved. If Daniels thought intimidation would silence him, he was dead wrong. Terrence arrived mid-morning, a tall man with a calm demeanor that belied the fire in his eyes. He brought a colleague, Serena, a private investigator with a reputation for uncovering buried truths. "I'm going to file the report with you," Terrence said as they sat at the dining table. "But Serena's here to take things a step further. She's going to dig into Daniels' connections and find out who's behind this threat." Serena nodded, her expression determined. "If they're watching you, we'll find out who they are. And we'll make them regret it." With their support, Marcus felt a spark of hope. They spent the next few hours gathering evidence, documenting the photograph, and filing the report. Marcus's reluctance to involve the police was validated when the desk officer took the report with thinly veiled indifference, but at least it was on record. As Serena began her investigation, Marcus returned to his main focus, keeping the pressure on Daniels. The town hall meeting had drawn national attention, and Marcus leveraged that momentum to organize a protest outside the police station. Hundreds of people showed up, holding signs and chanting for justice. The protest was peaceful, but the tension in the air was palpable. Officers lined the station steps, their expressions a mix of annoyance and unease. Among them, Marcus spotted Daniels. The officer stood near the entrance, his arms crossed and a smug smile playing on his lips. Marcus's blood boiled. He wanted to confront Daniels right then and there, but he knew better. Losing his temper would only play into their hands. Instead, he grabbed a megaphone and stepped to the front of the crowd. "This isn't just about my wife," he said, his voice ringing out over the chants. This is about every person who's been silenced, every family that's been torn apart by abuse of power. Daniels and the people protecting him think they're untouchable, but they're wrong. We won't stop until there's justice." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy invigorating Marcus. For the first time in days, he felt like he was making real progress. That evening, Serena called with an update. "I found something," she said, her tone serious. "Daniels has ties to a private security firm. They specialize in less-than-legal services, if you catch my drift." "What kind of services?" Marcus asked. "Intimidation, surveillance, even covering up evidence," Serena replied. "I dug into their client list, and guess what? The department's been contracting them for years." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So, they're using taxpayer money to harass people?" "Exactly," Serena said. "And there's more. I traced the SUV you mentioned. It belongs to that firm. Daniels isn't working alone. He's got a whole system backing him." The revelation was both infuriating and validating. Marcus had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed lit a fire in his chest. "What do we do next?" he asked. Serena hesitated. "This is dangerous territory, Marcus. If we expose this, they'll come after you even harder. Are you sure you want to keep going?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I don't have a choice. They've already come after my wife. If we back down now, they win." The following days were a blur of activity. Marcus and Serena worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and coordinating with activists to plan the next steps. The tension was high, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. One evening, as he returned home from a meeting, he noticed his front door was slightly ajar. His heart sank. He stepped inside cautiously, his eyes scanning the room. The house had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled open, papers scattered across the floor. On the dining table, a message was scrawled in red paint, "Last warning." Marcus clenched his fists, his anger threatening to consume him. Whoever was behind this was escalating, but so was he. Marcus stood in the center of his ransacked living room, his breath coming in short, furious bursts. The red-painted message on the dining table, "Last warning," seemed to mock him. For a moment, his thoughts were a chaotic blur of rage, fear, and frustration. But then, clarity hit him like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just about him, it was about Olivia, their unborn child, and every victim Daniels had left in his wake. If they thought fear would stop him, they couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, Marcus called Serena to update her on the break-in. "They're not being subtle anymore," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "They want me to back off, but they just gave us more proof." "Did you call the police?" Serena asked. "No point," Marcus replied bitterly. "They'll just brush it under the rug like everything else." "Let me handle it," Serena said firmly. "I'll document everything and add it to the file we're building. This is only going to strengthen our case." Marcus exhaled deeply. "I'm trusting you, Serena. But we need to act fast. I can't let this escalate any further." "We're getting close," Serena reassured him. "Just hang in there." That afternoon, Marcus returned to the hospital to check on Olivia. Her condition had stabilized, but the stress of everything weighed heavily on her. "I heard about the house," she said softly, her hand resting on her belly. "Marcus, this is getting dangerous." "I know," he said, sitting beside her bed and taking her hand. "But I can't stop now, Liv. They're trying to scare us into silence. If we let them win, nothing will ever change." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "Just promise me you'll be careful. I can't lose you." Marcus leaned in, kissing her forehead. "You won't. I promise." That evening, Serena called again with a critical update. "I've traced payments from the department to the private security firm," she said. "It's not just Daniels. They've been using this firm for years to cover up misconduct. This could blow the whole thing wide open." Marcus's heart raced. "How do we use this?" "Public pressure," Serena replied. "We release this information strategically, first to trusted journalists, then to activists who can amplify it. If we get enough eyes on this, the department won't be able to sweep it under the rug." Marcus nodded, a determined glint in his eye. "Let's do it." The next day, the story broke. Major news outlets picked up Serena's findings, and the revelations sent shockwaves through the community. The department's connections to the security firm were laid bare, painting a damning picture of systemic corruption. Protests erupted across the city, growing larger and more vocal with each passing hour. Daniels became the face of the scandal. His smug demeanor was replaced by visible unease as reporters hounded him for comments. The pressure was mounting, and for the first time, Marcus felt like justice was within reach. But Daniels wasn't finished. Late one night, Marcus received another call from an anonymous number. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't offering help, it was issuing a threat. "You think you've won, Carter," the voice sneered. "You've made some powerful enemies. Back off now, or you'll regret it." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "I don't scare easy," he said coldly. "Maybe not," the voice replied. "But your wife, your baby. How far are you willing to push this before it costs you everything?" The call ended, leaving Marcus seething. He had expected retaliation, but threatening Olivia and their unborn child crossed a line he couldn't ignore. Marcus contacted Serena immediately, relaying the threat. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "You need to protect your family." "I'm not backing down," Marcus said firmly. "But I need to make sure Olivia is safe." Serena was silent for a moment. "I have a friend who can help. A security expert. He can keep an eye on Olivia while we handle this." "Do it," Marcus said. "I'll pay whatever it takes." As Serena arranged for security, Marcus turned his attention back to the fight. He reached out to Terrence and the activists, strategizing their next move. The protests were gaining momentum, and more victims of Daniels and the department's corruption were coming forward. But Marcus knew they were running out of time. The threats were escalating, and it was only a matter of time before Daniels, or someone working for him, tried to silence him permanently. That night, as Marcus prepared for another restless evening, he heard a knock at the door. He froze, his instincts screaming at him to be cautious. Grabbing his phone, he approached the door and peered through the peephole. A man in plain clothes stood outside, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Marcus Carter," the man said loudly enough to be heard through the door. "I'm not here to hurt you. I have information you'll want to hear." Marcus hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. "Who are you?" "My name's irrelevant," the man replied. "But I know who's pulling the strings behind Daniels. Let me in, and I'll tell you everything." Marcus's hand trembled as he unlocked the door, his mind racing with possibilities. Was this man an ally, or another trap? The man stepped inside, his expression grim. "I don't have much time. What I'm about to tell you will change everything." The man stood in Marcus's dimly lit living room, his shadow stretching across the walls. His eyes were sharp, scanning the space as if ensuring they were truly alone. Marcus closed the door behind him, his unease growing. "You've got 5 minutes," Marcus said firmly. "Start talking." The man took a deep breath. "My name doesn't matter, but what I know does. I used to work for the same private security firm that Daniels is connected to. I've seen firsthand how deep the corruption goes." Marcus folded his arms, his skepticism evident. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm taking a huge risk just by being here," the man replied. "If they find out I talked to you, I'm as good as dead." But I couldn't stay silent anymore. Daniels and the department aren't the only ones involved. This goes higher, way higher. Marcus's stomach churned. "Higher? What do you mean?" The man pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open to a page covered in hastily scribbled notes. The security firm doesn't just clean up for cops like Daniels. They're part of a network that includes politicians, wealthy donors, and even federal agencies. They fund these operations to keep people like Daniels in play. "He's just a pawn." Marcus stared at the notebook, his mind racing. "And you have proof of this?" The man nodded. "Not everything, but enough to connect the dots. Financial records, emails, memos, it's all here. If you release this, it'll blow the lid off their entire operation." Marcus sat down, overwhelmed by the weight of the information. The fight had already felt monumental, but now it seemed impossibly large. "If this is as big as you say it is, why come to me?" Marcus asked. Why not take this to someone else? The man hesitated, his expression darkening. Because you've already made waves. The public's on your side. If this comes from you, it'll hit harder. And because they're watching me too closely. If I tried to go public, I wouldn't make it a day. Marcus looked at the notebook, the pages filled with damning evidence. If I do this, they'll come after me even harder. They will, the man admitted. But if you don't, they'll just keep doing this to other families. You're in this deep already, Marcus. Might as well go all the way. The man left shortly after, leaving Marcus alone with the notebook. He flipped through its contents, his heart pounding as he read email exchanges between high-ranking officials, transaction logs tied to the security firm, and memos outlining strategies for silencing whistleblowers. It was explosive, but it was also dangerous. The next morning, Marcus met with Serena and Terence to share what he'd learned. Their reactions were a mix of shock and determination. "This is bigger than anything we've handled before," Terence said, his voice heavy. "If this gets out, it'll rock the entire system." "But it's also a massive risk," Serena added. "If these people are as powerful as this guy claims, they'll do whatever it takes to bury this, and us." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze intense. "We've already risked everything. Olivia's in the hospital because of them. They've threatened my family, my home. I can't back down now." Serena nodded slowly. "Then we need a plan. We can't just drop this online and hope for the best. We need to coordinate with journalists, activists, and legal experts to protect ourselves and ensure this story gets the attention it deserves." Over the next few days, Marcus, Serena, and Terence worked tirelessly to organize the release of the information. They contacted trusted reporters and advocacy groups, ensuring the evidence would be distributed widely. Protest organizers prepared for a massive demonstration, and legal teams began drafting strategies for potential lawsuits. The city buzzed with anticipation as whispers of a major revelation spread. The night before the planned release, Marcus sat by Olivia's hospital bed. She was asleep, her face peaceful despite everything they had endured. He reached out and gently held her hand. "I'm doing this for you," he whispered. "For our baby. For everyone who's ever been silenced." His resolve hardened. No matter what happened, he wouldn't let their suffering be in vain. The next day, the truth came out. News outlets published the evidence, exposing the deep web of corruption connecting the police department, the private security firm, and powerful figures in the city. The revelations were staggering, sparking outrage across the nation. Protests erupted in cities far beyond their own, demanding accountability not just for Daniels but for the entire system. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeForOlivia and #ExposeTheCorruption. Daniels became the symbol of everything wrong with law enforcement, his name synonymous with abuse of power. The department scrambled to control the fallout, but it was too late. The tide had turned. But the victory came at a cost. That evening, as Marcus drove home, a black SUV appeared in his rearview mirror. His heart raced as the vehicle followed him, staying just close enough to be menacing. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his mind racing with possibilities. When he turned onto his street, the SUV sped past him, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. Marcus parked in his driveway, his body tense with adrenaline. As he stepped out of the car, his phone buzzed. A single text message appeared on the screen. "This isn't over." The air was thick with tension as Marcus sat in his living room, staring at the ominous text message on his phone. This isn't over. The battle he had fought so relentlessly was nearing its climax, but the stakes had never been higher. The shadows lurking around him weren't just threats anymore, they were promises. Marcus knew he had to make his next move carefully. The next morning, Marcus received a call from Serena. "Marcus, it's bad. The department's higher-ups are scrambling to discredit us. They're claiming the evidence we released is fake. They're even dragging Olivia's name through the mud, saying you're using her as a sympathy pawn." Marcus clenched his jaw, his anger bubbling to the surface. "They're desperate. That means we're winning." "Desperate or not, they're playing dirty," Serena replied. "We need to stay ahead of them." Marcus nodded. "We will. They're not getting away with this." As the day wore on, Marcus worked with his team to counter the department's narrative. Activists amplified their message, lawyers pushed for legal action, and journalists dug deeper into the corruption. The protests swelled in size, drawing national attention. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, a reluctant but determined leader. But that evening, the fight became personal once again. As Marcus arrived at the hospital to check on Olivia, he noticed a patrol car parked outside. His stomach sank. Rushing inside, he found Olivia's room empty. Panic surged through him as he flagged down a nurse. "Where's my wife? Olivia Carter?" "She was in room 213. The nurse looked startled. I'm not sure. She was transferred earlier, but I didn't get the details." "Transferred?" Marcus demanded. "By who?" Before the nurse could answer, Marcus's phone buzzed. He pulled it out to see a text message from an unknown number. "We have your wife. Stand down, or you'll lose everything." Marcus's vision blurred with rage. His hands shook as he called Serena. "They've taken Olivia," he said through gritted teeth. "What?" Serena exclaimed. "How? Where?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find her," Marcus said, already heading for his car. "Wait," Serena said urgently. "Don't do anything reckless. We'll figure this out together." "No," Marcus said firmly. "This ends tonight." Using Serena's earlier research, Marcus traced Danielle's known hangouts and the locations tied to the private security firm. One address stood out, a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. Marcus drove with a singular focus, his mind replaying every moment that had led to this. The confrontation at the diner. The threats. The break-in. The photo. They had taken everything from him, but he refused to let them win. When Marcus arrived at the warehouse, the area was eerily quiet. He parked his car a safe distance away and approached on foot, his heart pounding in his chest. The building was dimly lit, with only a few vehicles parked outside. As he crept closer, he spotted two men standing guard at the entrance. Marcus scanned the area, his mind racing for a plan. He noticed a stack of crates nearby and grabbed a loose metal rod. Taking a deep breath, he moved silently toward the guards. In a swift motion, he knocked one out with a rod and grappled with the second, incapacitating him with a punch. He grabbed a key card from one of the guards and slipped inside the warehouse. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of dimly lit corridors and echoing footsteps. Marcus kept to the shadows, his adrenaline driving him forward. He finally heard muffled voices coming from a room at the end of the hallway. Peeking through a small window, he saw Olivia tied to a chair, her face pale but defiant. Daniels stood in front of her, his smug expression making Marcus's blood boil. "You should have kept your husband on a leash," Daniels sneered. "Now you're both going to pay the price." Olivia glared at him, her voice steady despite her fear. "You think you can scare us into silence? You're pathetic." Daniels raised a hand as if to strike her, but Marcus had seen enough. Bursting into the room, he tackled Daniels to the ground. The two men struggled, their movements clumsy and violent. Marcus's anger gave him an edge, and he landed a brutal punch that left Daniels dazed. "Touch her again, and I'll end you," Marcus growled, his voice shaking with rage. Before Daniels could respond, more guards stormed into the room. Marcus braced himself for a fight, but just then, the sound of sirens blared outside. Police cars and unmarked vehicles surrounded the warehouse, their lights casting red and blue flashes across the walls. Serena appeared in the doorway, flanked by officers and federal agents. "Marcus, stand down, we've got this." The guards surrendered as the agents moved in, arresting Daniels and his accomplices. Marcus rushed to Olivia, untying her and pulling her into his arms. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I am now," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. The takedown of Daniels and the private security firm became national news. The evidence Serena had gathered, combined with the raid, led to multiple arrests and the dismantling of the corrupt network. The police department faced widespread scrutiny, with calls for reform echoing across the country. Marcus and Olivia became symbols of resilience, their story inspiring countless others to stand up against injustice. Months later, Marcus and Olivia welcomed a healthy baby girl into the world. As Marcus held her tiny hand, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace and purpose. "You're safe now," he whispered to her. "And I'll make sure it stays that way." The fight had been grueling, but Marcus knew it had been worth it. Justice had been served, and their family's future was bright. What would you have done if you were in Marcus's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.